Think of today as a little trial run for your quiz tomorrow, a little test run. Hopefully this goes really smoothly and you get all right answers and you're feeling confident and happy. If on any of these, if you're thinking, whoa, you know what? Hey, guys, this is very realistic. What if all week long for these first 3 days of class, you've been like, you know what, I have missed number 2 every single time, and I'm feeling nervous about that on my quiz tomorrow. Maybe you should practice and study number 2. That makes sense? Do a little bit of prep work. Go back and look through the week's DMRs and do a little practicing and see if you can improve for tomorrow, whatever the case might be. All right, so here we go. If you are going to be evaluating an expression like that, we're going to start by putting blank parentheses in there. So it's going to be negative blank squared plus 3, and then parentheses blank squared. Thank you. Oh, man. Frozen again. As if by magic, there it is. So then once you do this, you're going to drop in all of your x's in the appropriate spots and all your y's in the appropriate spots. So negative 1 would go there, and negative 2 would go here and here. Once you've done that, of course, we're not going to be using left to right as our strategy to simplify this. We're going to be using PEMDAS, right? And so I'm going to do all the work in the parentheses first. So I'll just rewrite this as the opposite of negative 1 squared plus 3. Let's start off with this one right here. Negative 2 in parentheses squared is 4. Minus the absolute value. Negative 1 times negative 2, of course, is 2. Oops. And we close that off with that. Let's continue to do the work in the parentheses first. What is 4 minus the absolute value of 2?
2.
It's just 2, yeah. So it'd be the opposite of negative 1 squared plus 3, parentheses 2 squared. At this point, I've done all the work in the parentheses. I'm ready to move on to the in PEMDAS. That's exponents, right? So exponents, this one is always a tough one. If you just look at that expression, just that one piece, what would that entire piece simplify to be? The opposite of negative 1 squared. In the end would actually be negative 1, right? Think it through like this. Like I said, this is a tough one. If you just look at this, you say I've highlighted everything but that extra negative out front?
Yeah.
What is negative 1 in parentheses squared?
1.
It's positive 1, but that negative is still there, right? That doesn't get to go away. So this would just be negative 1 plus 3, and then 2 squared, of course, is 4. So, every now and then I'll see somebody look at this right here. Are you guys paying attention? Every now and then I'll see somebody look at something like that, and they'll say, oh, that's 6 squared.
It's not right.
What are they doing wrong when they say that?
They multiply 3 and 2.
Multiplying before, and that's not right. Okay, it is wrong. You're right. Okay, so then 3 times 4 comes next, so it's negative 1 plus 12. Did you all get negative or positive 11? Excuse me?
Yes.
I did the same thing. I started writing negative.
That's really weird. Yeah, I don't know why I wrote that. It's like, no, positive. Positive 11. We good? Any questions? Again, this is a test run, so if you look at your paper and you look at mine and you think, whoa, there's a lot of differences and I'm not feeling comfortable with this, you might want to look at it and say, well, why is that really negative 1? Or what's up with the absolute value or whatever, right? Now would be your time to ask, because tomorrow you're going to be assessed on it. I want to make sure you're good. Yeah?
I did my DMR too. So you said tomorrow.
Let's talk about that at a different time. Maybe. Okay, we good? All right, number 2. So number 2 is 11 minus 5x is less than or equal to 2x minus 3. We're supposed to solve that inequality and graph. Suggestion, what did you guys do first? So I heard Callie say that she subtracted 2x from both sides first, so I'm going to do that. Of course, that's a matter of opinion, right? Highly debatable.
I don't judge.
Okay, so once you've done that, you get this. What would you guys do next? If you did do what Callie started off with, how would you guys proceed from here?
Minus 11.
Minus 11 from both sides, yep. So subtracting 11, I end up with negative 5x is less than or equal to negative 14. And then what would be my final step?
That's negative
Wait,
7x.
when yeah, negative 7x.
Oh, negative 7. Goodness gracious.
Yeah,
What do you mean, brother?
I started looking.
I'd love to say that was anything other than an oops, but perhaps my blood sugar is low because I just ate lunch. How about that?
I
Whatever.
would believe that.
Okay. So then, what's my final step? Divide by -7. What's the key step here? If you divide both sides by a negative, the inequality has got to flip around. Yep. So instead of x being less than anything, it's going to be x is greater than or equal to 2. What kind of a circle do we put on the 2 on the graph? Filled in or closed. Yep, so we'll close that off right here. And the arrow goes which way? To the right, because we want all the numbers that are bigger than or equal to 2. All those numbers to the right would be the correct ones. That would make our inequality true. Questions? Concerns? Again, this is a test run. Tomorrow you'll see something like this. Hopefully it'll go really well for you. Okay, last one. Did you all recognize that number 3 is in slope-intercept form?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what are the two things you got to have to write the equation or graph of a line? Slope and a point that's on the line. The slope is
Negative or 3.
3. What is the point that's on the line?
0, negative 5.
Thank you for saying it correctly. It's 0, comma, -5. Remember, a coordinate point always has an x and a y. It's never just a single number. Okay, so when I graph something like this, do I start off by counting the slope off, or do I plot the point first? I always plot the point first. 0, -5 is right here. My slope is 3. You might want to think of that as 3 over 1. Your rise would be 3. Your run would be 1. And so I'm going to rise 3. Let's try that again. So rise 3, run 1. There is a second point. And I could do it again. Rise 3, run 1. There is a third point. I'm always going to try to connect these with a nice straight line. And I always put arrows on the end as well. All right, look at the whole thing. Questions? We're good? Okay, cool. So I've got a review question set up for you all. You guys will flip open to your class practice. I want you guys to try this first one, A, B, and C. I feel like based on what we did yesterday, you got a really good shot at being able to do 1, A, B, C. So please try this. Please, whatever you do at this point, don't move on to number 2. I want to do number 2 with you. So just do numbers 1, A, B, C. And we'll check your answers in a few minutes. Good? Okay, cool. So these next two I want to do with you, and then we'll finish up with a little bit of practice. If things go well, it should leave us with a lot of time at the end for us to get some other things accomplished. Okay? We good? All right, flip over, please. In this, if you're going to graph a line or write the equation of the line, what are the two things you got to have?
Point and a slope.
A point on the line and a slope. That has not changed. That is still 100% true, even when we're looking at a question like number 2. So I wanted to kind of take you guys through this one. I want to take you through number 3, give you a chance to practice these, and then we'll be done. Okay. Good? Here we go. So we are told that a line, the one that we're trying to find, a line passes through the point -4, 7. So remember, there's two things we got to have, a slope and a point. After reading that first phrase, what do I have? I have the point that's on my line. That makes sense? Okay, so I'll just write this over here. The point on my line is -4, 7. The point on my line is -4, 7. The slope, I am not particularly sure about that yet. If I keep reading, it says a line passes through that point and is parallel to this other line. So guys, again, this is really easy to get confused with the details. Remember the big overarching concept. You need to have two things to find the equation of a line. Slope and a point. We already have the point. The only thing we need to have is the slope. So let me ask you a question. This was from a little ways back. Do you guys remember the relationship between parallel lines? The relationship between parallel lines is? They have the same slope in different points. Okay? So if I'm told that the line that I'm interested in is parallel to this other one, if I could just steal the slope from that other one, shouldn't that be my slope?
Yeah.
Because I know that the slopes of parallel lines are the same. All right, sounds good. Well, what's the slope of that line? It's not particularly obvious, is it? What kind of form does that, you know what? It would be really easy to say this. I think the slope is -1. Why is the slope not -1? It's not in slope-intercept form. The only way that you can see the slope easily is if that equation is in slope-intercept form, and it's not. How do we know that it's not in slope-intercept form? It's not y equals mx plus b. Yeah, the y is not by itself. Fair enough? So, Kyrie, if I was going to try to put it into that form, what would you do first?
First, I would subtract 6 from both sides.
Agreed? So, progress, but we're not there yet. Anybody, what would you do next?
Or add x to both sides.
Sure, add x to both sides. Divide by 2. So this will give me division by 2, so on and so forth. I will get y equal, what would be a more convenient way to write x over 2?
1/2.
1/2 x. That'd be a better way to write it. It's the same thing, just better in this case. -3. So of all the things in that blue circle that I just drew, what's the only thing that I really need to use?
1/2 x.
Not 1/2 x,
1/2.
1/2, because that's the slope, right? Remember, the principle, the concept is parallel lines have the same slope. And so the slope of that line is 1/2. So instead of -1 for a slope, I know that my slope is 1/2. Okay, so then what I do is I take that information and I say, all right, I've got a point on my line, I've got a slope of 1/2. I'm supposed to write now the slope-intercept equation of my line. I'm actually going to use point slope to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of like we did in our early example. I'm going to say, well, point slope would be y minus 7 equals 1/2 times x minus -4. That's point slope. I'll just convert this over to slope-intercept just like we did at the start of our class, or at least the start of this section. So I would start by distributing the 1/2. That would give me 1/2 x plus 2. My last step would be to add the 7 over. Y equals 1/2 x plus 9. Now if you compare these two, like the one that I'm circling in red, this is the one I was asked to find. But if you compare these two lines, do you see how they're parallel? Yeah, they both have a slope of 1/2, but they go through a different y-intercept. What's the y-intercept on the blue circled line? 0, -3, and on ours it's 0, 9. Okay? So, it's really easy with these to get confused and frustrated because there are a lot of details. Try not to let the details get you off of the big concept. The big concept is you need a point and you need a slope. Like how you get the slope, a little more challenging on this one than some of the other questions we've done. That's what it comes down to. Find the point, find the slope, put it together. Got one more, but before we move on, do you have any questions on that one? Next one is going to feel pretty similar to the one we just did. Okay, so here's number 3. Okay, so this one says, a line passes through the point 8, 5. I'll remind you again, what are the two things we've got to have? Slope and a point that's on the line. What do I have right now? I've got the point right now. There it is. So the point on my line is 8, 5. I also need the slope on my line. I keep reading. So my line not only passes through 8, 5, it is, it's a different word than before, perpendicular to this line. So what I'm supposed to do is I am supposed to use this phrase to help me figure out my slope. So on that other question I said, what's the relationship between parallel lines? And you all said they have the same slope, right? What's the relationship between perpendicular lines? Reciprocals and opposite. So that's exactly right. So you flip it and you change the sign. Okay, so then what's the slope of that comparison line? What's the slope of this line?
4.
4.
The slope is 4. Are we going to use 4?
No.
Because we're not parallel to it, we're perpendicular to it. So we got to do what you guys said. We need to do the opposite reciprocal. So what's the reciprocal of 4?
1/4.
And the opposite of that would be
Negative.
negative 1/4. So my slope is,
Negative 1/4.
I'll pause for just a second here. If you're feeling like Coy, who just was like, do you have any questions? You okay? Come on. If you're looking at that and you're like, how on earth did he come up with negative 1/4 or some variation on that? Let's talk. I'd love to go back over it or show you some other reasonings. Joe?
Can you go back over it?
Sure. So perpendicular lines obviously are not parallel lines, right? They intersect. And I'll just draw some random perpendicular-ish looking lines. Red and blue. Something like that. Okay. So here's the big concept. We'll talk about the mechanics of it as well. The concept is this. Perpendicular lines do not have the same slope like parallel lines. Perpendicular lines have slopes that are opposite and reciprocal. So let's just say, for instance, that the slope of the red line is 4/5. Say we know that somehow. We don't know the slope of the blue line, but we do know that those two lines are perpendicular because the principle of perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. I could then use that to help me find the slope of the blue line. The slope of the blue line would be the reciprocal, which is just a vertical flip, so 5/4. But then it's also the opposite of that. Opposite simply means change the sign. So negative 5/4 for that slope. So what we did is we said, all right, the line that we care about, we don't know the slope yet, but we do know that our line is perpendicular to that one. So we look at this one and we say, where's the slope? Is the slope 9? Nope, that's just the y-coordinate. Is the slope 1? Nope, that's just the x-coordinate for the point. The slope is 4, right? Because it's in point-slope form. So if the slope of that line is 4, the slope of our line would have to be the reciprocal
Gotcha.
and opposite, so negative 1/4.
Okay.
So I saw it in there somewhere. You're like, got it. Good. Anybody else feeling like Joe was feeling him like a minute ago? Like, wait a minute, I don't know where that came from. Thanks for asking. Is there anybody else feeling in a similar place? We all do silly things sometimes. What did I forget earlier? Oh, I said negative 2 plus negative 5 was negative 5. I know that that's not true. I made a silly mistake. We all get a little confused sometimes, right? It's okay. All that does is prove that you're a human. If you never made a mistake, we'd be like, tink, tink, tink. Are you some kind of robot, you know? Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody doesn't get it at some point, right? Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. So once we get to this point, we just put it together like we have been doing. And so what we would do is we would say, I like point slope. There are other ways to do this, but I would write y minus 5 equals negative 1/4 times x minus 8. Just using point slope as a gateway to get to slope intercept. What is my first step on that path? Distributive property. So y minus 5 equals negative 1/4 x. And then that's a pretty easy one. What on earth is negative 1/4 times negative 8?
Positive 2.
It's positive 2. It's got to be a positive, right? A negative times a negative. Essentially 8 divided by 4. So plus 2. I'd add 5 to both sides. I end up with negative 1/4 x plus 7.
You got it.
Okay. Hey, this time 5 plus 2 is actually 7 instead of 5.
What?
Love it. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I just figured it out.
Anybody have a question on how on earth I got the 2? Any questions at all? Now's your chance. Be bold. I'm a question asker. I'm getting my master's degree, I think I told you guys. I have a class that starts next Monday, and I already asked a question. Class hadn't even started yet. I'm like, what are we supposed to do with this again? Oh, okay, cool. It's not because I'm dumb. I just like to know what I'm supposed to do, and it didn't make sense. So it's okay to ask questions. All right, cool. Well, then I want you guys to do a couple of these on your own. So if you guys would skip ahead a little bit. I'm not too worried about number 1 right now. I would like for you guys to try number 2 and number 3, and I think that's it. Yep. So please try number 2 and number 3, both of which are hanging out up there. I will give you guys some time and space to do this. Once we've cleaned this up and we feel good, it'll be time to move on to either some practicing with WebAssign or taking care of stuff we got to take care of. So anyway, go for it. I got to say, walking around, I feel super encouraged. I saw a lot of really quality work. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page, give you a chance to ask questions, then I'll be done, and we'll be on to working on WebAssign sort of stuff. Okay, so this says, write the slope-intercept equation of the line that passes through the point 10, 6. I really think that it's a good practice to write this out and say, the point on my line is 10, 6, and so I'm going to write that down. The other thing I got to have is a slope. And so then I start to think, all right, well then the slope must be, yes. Oh, did I freeze it? I froze it. Thank you.
All good, bro.
There we go. So then my slope must be contained in this somewhere. I am told that my line is parallel to that one. So the relationship between parallel lines, Jaden, is that their slopes, parallel lines, slopes are the same. They're equal. Yep. So Jaden, what is the slope of that orange highlighted line that I have up there on the screen?
1/5.
And so my slope would be
1/5.
just 1/5. My slope is not. This might seem like a really fine hair to split, but it's really important you understand. If the slope is 1/5 x, we are no longer talking about a line. We're talking about a curve, and this is a line. So my slope is 1/5. Agreed. So then we'll just put this together. Like as you typically do, I'm going to use point slope. So y minus 6 equals 1/5 times x minus 10. As we've done, we're going to distribute that 1/5. So it'd be y minus 6 equals 1/5 x minus 2. And then we add 6. Here is my final linear equation. Here's your chance to ask a question. Y equals 1/5 x plus 4. Something doesn't make sense. Hopefully it's not because I made some little arithmetic error. Have any questions? The other one was different, right? It wasn't something that was totally foreign to you, but it was different, wasn't it? Let's take a look then at number 3. Number 3 says, write the slope-intercept equation of the line that passes through the point negative 9, 4 and is perpendicular to, this is where it goes different, the line that passes through those 2 points. It's a little bit different, isn't it? So here we go. Please, no matter how it's presented, if you're asked to find the equation of a line, what are the 2 things you got to have? It's always the same thing. So please don't let a different presentation distract you from the bigger concept. So point and slope is what I want. Guys, what point does my line go through? Negative 9, 4. You want to be really careful here because there's 2 other points running around here. So you want to be careful with that. Then my line is perpendicular to this other line. So what's the relationship between perpendicular lines' slopes? Opposite and reciprocal. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find the slope of this other line. And I'm going to say that it's 3 minus 6 over 8 minus 9. Doing that change in y over change in x. This gives me 3. So am I going to just come over here and say, hey, my slope is 3?
No.
Why?
Opposite.
Yeah, because my line is perpendicular to that one. I got to do the opposite and reciprocal of that. So instead of 3, I'm going to write negative though, right? Because we changed the sign. So negative 1/3. And now I'm back to the same place I've been. At this point, it should feel like you've been there over and over and over and over, right? So we'd write y minus 4 equals negative 1/3 times x minus negative 9. Distributing, I get y equals y minus 4 equals negative 1/3 x minus 3. And then I'd add 4 to both sides. Did you guys get y equals negative 1/3 x plus 1? Yay! Any questions? Do we disagree on anything? No? Are we good?
We're good.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Grab a computer or a phone. You guys can get rolling on your WebAssign Jaden, this will be a good time for us to take care of our business.
Wait, Callie. Mom's doing this. Yeah, well, she didn't.